Hi, and welcome to Beyond the Drip, a podcast about infusion therapy. My name is Jon Love, your host, and I've got all my co-hosts here. We're excited to get going on episode 2. Beyond the Drip is a comprehensive podcast around the infusion providers, infusion therapies, and everything. The idea Beyond the Drip is that when we have an infusion drip, it obviously drips, but there's a lot more that goes along to that. And so we have a great cast of characters as our co-hosts around everything about infusion therapy. We start with our tech guru, Brandon Carpenter, CEO of MedEdge, who is in charge of tech and services for our podcast. Hi, Brandon.
Hey, good morning.
Good. Then we have Brian O'Sullivan. He's our payer strategist of the O'Sullivan Group and our payer relations. Brian, how are you?
Doing great. Excited about this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, last but absolutely not least, is Pam McIntyre. Pamela is CEO of Expert Infusion Nurse Consulting, and she is our guru around operations. Everything operations is her world. And Pam, we're so excited to see you again for episode 2.
How are y'all?
So episode 2, guys, so episode 2 is our round robin. And so Pam has a hat on that we can all see and a bolo tie. So Pam is ready. None of us really, let's just be honest. Pam gets all the extra credit and the rest of us do not, because this episode is called The Wild West of Infusion. And so I think this episode was really birthed out of I heard a meme the other day, because we could talk about memes, right? We're still young enough to talk about memes. And it said, once a man turns 35, he has 2 choices. He must really start liking history or learn how to smoke meats. And I absolutely think, yeah, that's about right. And I can't smoke any meats, but I love history. And one of the things I love is American history and the Wild West and pioneer days, right? And guys, that's what our episode is about today. Is now, for all of our viewers, I want to orientate you around these 4 people. All of us have independent businesses that are leading in our functionality. Mine is revenue cycle management with Prochant. Brandon is MedEdge, tech and services and software. Brian is the O'Sullivan Group, payer relations, payer strategy. And of course, Pam is expert nursing consultant for infusion, and she's around ops and nursing and training. So, but we are traveling the country, guys, right? And we're in all 50 states, and we're traveling around. We're talking to all of these Home Infusion, AIC, AIS, all of the different type of organizations. And it came together in our conversations was, doesn't this look a lot like the 1800s in America? And so, kind of opening that conversation, I want to challenge us around this idea of why. Why does this look like the Wild West of healthcare is really infusion therapy? Who wants to go first?
I'm going to touch on that one. Okay. Go ahead, Brian.
Okay. Go ahead, Brian. We'll go Brian then Pam.
Okay. So I had a payer ask me recently, if like, what's the deal? Where's the gasoline that sparked this, right? And, if we've been around in healthcare for a while, we've ridden a few of these waves of surgery centers, moving procedures out of the hospital, standing imaging centers, urgent care, all of those type of settings that were driven somewhat by economics, somewhat by technology, and also just for innovation of doing the right thing for the patient. So to me, this is a good part of this is it's very consumer centric of bringing healthcare, quality healthcare, safe healthcare, closest to the consumer. And that was my answer to the payers of this is where this is coming from. In addition to things Pam probably knows of the growth of therapies and things like that that are driving the industry as well.
You're right. It's a need. If you think about it, when did it start? My husband and I were talking the other night that we don't want to wait 2 days for a package. I remember filling out an order form from a catalog and mailing a check. And it was a revelation when you could call on the phone to make an order. Show my age. When I started in infusion,
the Sears Roebuck. Yeah, the Sears Roebuck was a big thing, Pam, right?
I had every page in that catalog down here at Christmas. It was almost like one of those unfolded Christmas tree things that, where you had the catalog all the edges folded, and it comes out to be this show my age again. But once upon a time,
well,
when our
you did that so your mom. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Pam, you did that so your mom might pick up on those dog-eared pages and buy those things, right? Yeah, I know.
Secretly hoping. No, I think the point I'm trying to make is we needed to bring it to people because we're so used to this instant culture. People are in much more of a hurry than they ever were. So we have to be able to meet them where they live. And that means ambulatory infusion, increased access, weekend access, evening access, and a lot of choices.
I agree. I'm gonna ask each one of you to take a second thing. When I think about the Wild West, okay, so I love the pioneer days. There was the Louisiana Purchase. So then we went over into Indiana. Obviously, we had to try to settle that. Then we went out west, and so there are three things, right? That really, when we went out and settled west, there were three things, and I'm going to ask each one of you to take one. All right. So the first one, Mr. O'Sullivan, I'm going to ask you to take, which is uncharted territory. We went out there. All right. So listen, I'm going to give a real quote. All right. When Lewis and Clark went across the mountains and went into the area, we had no map of it. This is a direct quote. There were people, very smart people, who thought there might be woolly mammoths there because we've seen some bones of a woolly mammoth, and there might even be a dinosaur. That's how little we knew about, New Mexico and, Nebraska. We didn't have anything. We didn't have a clue about, Idaho and everything. So certainly uncharted territory for the country. But Brian, in healthcare, infusion feels like uncharted territory, right?
It sure does. I think we're far enough along where when we headed out west, we didn't think it was a flat earth and we were going to fall off the edge. Although some days it feels like we're in an abyss. But clearly, the challenges I've seen of AIC and interchangeable. Ambulatory Infusion Center, physician office, Service 11, care delivered by physicians, by nurse practitioners. Ambulatory Infusion Suite, an office, a suite within a pharmacy, delivering different therapies under the license of a pharmacy, and a payer, they're the same, right? They're just variations. So even just talking about definitions, sometimes we just aren't speaking the same language. The barriers, when you see infusion, people, their first thought might be home infusion therapy. Another person might think chemotherapy. Infusion, the business we're in, it isn't very cleanly defined. What I try and bring in my relationship with payers is helping them to understand the differences, but also the value that AICs and AISs and home infusion therapy, that they all bring to consumers.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. The second that we see in history, Brandon Carpenter, coming to you for this one, high potential rewards, right? High potential reward. Hey, there's gold in them there hills. And I don't know. It's every week a private equity calls me. Hey, we're going to open up 7 AICs. Do you know what that is? Not yet. So they see the rewards, Brand. There's gold and silver, right? But what do you see?
Yeah, and I'll just tell you, John. So, we had 2 conferences in the last 90 days, NHIA in Austin and NICA at Vegas. And I had meetings with, several PEs trying to figure this out and everything. And it's really interesting to me that there is, because, even though we feel like there's gold in them hills, we see reimbursement getting kind of eroded away and all this kind of thing. I also think about it from a perspective of how we are also seeing not just private equity, but other verticals coming into the space. I've had calls from nuclear pharmacies and retail pharmacies and all these other guys jumping in. So it's really interesting to just see how many people are really, quote unquote, heading out west to take advantage of it.
In keeping with that, okay, a lot of people went out west and they died. So you're going to handle, Pam, the significant risks. Everybody went out west because there's gold in those hills, right? There's also death and rattlesnakes and all these folks running out here, Pam, nuclear pharmacies, retail. We've never run an AIC. We're going to go, drop $2 million and go start up 7. There's significant risks here.
Yeah, I get it. I don't know who's watched Yellowstone. You all see those people going out in their wagons and they don't have enough food and, they end up dead on the trail. The one thing that I find is consistent among people that struggle is that they don't gather in the experts when they're starting out. They don't have someone that's done it and been there and been in the business helping them. It's kind of like me. If I were to go try and interview a banker for a job, I don't know banking. I really think that you can't implement a process or interview for a skill that you don't possess. That's why I think it's so important. And I find that a lot of people will trial and error, and then they ask for help. Well, by then, they may have wasted 6 to 9 months where they could have been up and running. And I think that's...
And $1 million.
They're hemorrhaging money by the time they ask for help.
That's interesting, Pam. Talk about that because you said, $2 million and everything. And we've had a lot of folks try to come in and bootstrap their budget. Realistically, somebody coming in, let's say from a retail space, real conversation here. Retail pharmacy call me and say, we want to engage you and a group of folks to help us build out our AIS and AIC. And they didn't know the difference. And then also, we're building out a clean room, but, they're like, we have a budget of like $10,000. And I just was like, guys, like,
we'll think about it.
Like you can't even get an Entyvio script for out the door for $10,000. So realistically, when they're looking at those things, yeah. So what should somebody be really looking at from that perspective?
I think verbiage is really important. Your point about everybody, Brian, saying that you don't have the common language. So first thing I've learned to do is to lay it out for people. So for starters, we can all speak the same tongue. So we know that we're talking about a common thing. And then have a set of standards that helps you make sure that, first of all, your patients are going to be safe because nothing spreads faster than bad news. And that you can deliver what you say you're going to deliver. Because if all your folks are brand new and they haven't done a process, chances are your delivery is going to fall flat. And that starts with authorizations. And that is the biggest thing I find that breaks the wheels off the bus. First off, if it takes you 6 weeks to get an authorization, the next time that provider is not going to send you a referral.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. Let's start here, guys. Who's rushing in? All right. So let's start here. We've established some. Let's pepper a little bit here. I think we know private equities is rushing in, right? And so I get a call a week. Guys, I get a call a week. I got a call 2 weeks ago from a gentleman, 2 gentlemen out of the Northeast, New Jersey, New York area. And he must have said it to me 5 times. Capital's not an option. Capital's not an issue. Capital's not an issue. Get it. You guys are flush with cash.
I think I talked to them.
And you probably did. Capital's not an issue. Okay, I get it. It might be an issue if you open these up, by the way. But let's before we get to the uncharted territory, which we'll go to next. All right, so we got private. Who else?
Retail pharmacies.
The more I talk to people,
nuclear pharmacies.
Yeah. The more I talk to people, the more I think I can do this. And that's your retail pharmacy, nuclear pharmacy type folks. They see everybody getting into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and my guess is, Pam, that they see the top line revenue. But I'm not certain they see the bottom line revenue, right? They're like, you open one of this up, you got $8 million in revenue in 18 months. Like, yeah, in revenue, of course. But Pam, isn't there a bottom line revenue?
That's the biggest thing I try to get across to investors when I call. Is you got revenue and then you've got your margin. Because they ask me, why are these drugs so attractive? Why does everybody want a piece of the action? And, we talked about in episode 1, it's not just about getting paid, it's about keeping the money. If you lose one dispense and you're running bare bones as it is, you upset your apple cart.
Yep. Brian, we have, PE, we have health systems seeking to expand, but then we have these independent pharmacies exploring new revenue streams. Brian, you deal with payers every day. Well, what do you see as the pitfalls of people running in and not understanding the payer landscape?
They think they have a referral source, right? And that they can get contracted. And that might be true. They've got no shortage of referrals, but they don't see the headwinds of particularly in a saturated market that if they're standalone. It's easier for a GI practice or a rheumatology practice to start delivering drugs that aren't their specialty, right? Than it is to start de novo with a medical director that might not even have a background, clinical background. We see radiologists, emergency medicine, anesthesia, OB. When those clinical specialties, we don't think about infusion, but they're serving as medical directors. That becomes a question for payers of, is this legit? Which is a great question for them to ask. So sort of that gold rush mentality of what are the motivations of the people jumping in? Is it purely ROI, or are they meeting a need based on demand in their market? And I think that's important for payers to know that distinction.
Yeah, I'm glad you used that gold rush mentality. That's going to couple into Carpenter. I'm coming to you on this one. Competitive landscape. So there was a time, right, where you were trying to settle the West, right? And the federal government were like, hey, listen, you can have the land. All right. You just have it. You plant your flag, but you got to build a farm, build a school, start a community, right? And that's how we're going to settle it. That feels like the rush, Brandon, that feels like the rush. But then there's how do I set down AICs? Like setting one down in San Diego versus the panhandle of Texas is very different. Right. And geographic matters, payer matters. Like, what do you see this race? Because there is a point where we're going to be saturated, right? There's a point where it's like, there's no need for any more AICs.
Well, and that's really interesting because, when we're talking with folks and you said San Diego versus the panhandle of Texas and things like that. I mean, and even going back to history, like, for those that remember the late 90s of banking, we were getting, the big three, Wells Fargo and Bank of America and all these guys just gobbling up everybody. And there was a point where in the finance world, they thought there's only going to be three banks. And then suddenly this whole just boom of community banks happened. And we see these ebbs and flows. So, it's interesting because I feel like a lot of these guys, even heat zones and things like that. I mean, I talked to somebody last week and they were like, yeah, we're going to go open up in Houston and it's a great market. And I'm like, you're going to sit there in the desert for 18 months because you're in a heat zone with half of your payers, because they're like, you have to be operating for 18 months without a change of ownership. And they're like, what are you talking about? And then they called me back like 2 days later and say, that was the most basic misunderstanding we had in the entire thing, and we decided to dump it, right? So I feel like there's a lot of these guys that just seem to have flush with cash, like you talked about. Capital's not an option, just jumping in and not understanding. Payers are saying, we don't have a need for you, we don't have enough lives, there's too many providers. But then there's these other zones that are going, but they're just, they are seriously just saying, let me plant my flag in as many places as I possibly can. Almost like a venture capitalist type of mentality, right? If I put 20 out there and 2 hit, I don't care about the other 18.
Right. Yeah. That's fair. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. And I think, it's the promise of high returns, right, in a booming market. But we're all seeing that. And I think we could say this. These are patients.
Right.
Okay. So there is a point where we say, hey, guys, you're getting into patience. This isn't coffee. Okay. This isn't bicycles. This isn't things that we should have good service on, right? Because we want to have good service. This is people's lives. These are chronically ill people who need these infusions to either live, number one, or to live in a way that thrives, right? And quit being sick. Obviously.
And one thing
yeah, go ahead.
that I'm also curious about is, we talked about the gold rush, and you had a lot of folks who were running to the opportunity, right? Like, I'm going to go make my fortune, make my legacy, all this kind of stuff. But on the flip side of that, you had a lot of people who were going out west to escape their past. And so I'm almost curious, like we see a lot of these pharmacies, like I said, Nuclear's one of the ones that seem to be really coming into this space, who they've never talked to a patient because they're just billing directly to the hospital. They have no idea what payers are. They're like, oh, I signed up for a PSAO. And you're just like, that's great. You're going to grind it out, right? Versus going and getting commercial contracts. All this kind of stuff. But I'm almost wondering, is there an outside force that is pushing people into the market instead of people necessarily coming into the market because they see an opportunity?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a really good question. I don't know that we know the answer to that, because here's the deal. Nobody knew the answer to the Wild West until it was done, right? We're still moving there, right? Right. I'm going to go to Pam for this next one on, navigating uncharted territory, specifically Pam around operational hurdles, staffing, logistics. Pam, this is a service business, right? I mean, certainly, we're talking mostly about AIC, Ambulatory Infusion Centers, right? That's where surely HIT, Home Infusion Therapy, especially that's growing, right? That's growing, but AICs are the ones that we all can shake our heads at and say, man, everybody wants to go. They're popping up, everywhere. We just had Reese Norris from We Infuse on saying that I think he has 900 of them on his software. I mean, just crazy growth. But Pam, this is like a service. If I don't serve this patient well, I lose this patient. And if I lose a chronically ill patient who's $37,000 a month, you're talking about losing $400,000 in revenue a month or a year. Pam, talk to us about what maybe they don't understand about staffing, logistics, training, opening. And Pam, you're traveling and helping these things open up, right, around the country?
It's interesting you use San Diego and the Panhandle of Texas because I'm opening centers in both places. And I can tell you it looks really different.
I think I know the same guys.
But the consistent thing between each infusion center that I open is nurses and operators come from so many diverse backgrounds, but how do you get us to all speak the same language? And it lies in training and understanding. If they hire an infusion nurse and you go talk to that nurse and they worked at an IV bar, but that's it. That's two very different things. So bringing them up to speed with just the mentality that if you mix this product wrong, you might lose 50 grand is really important to the bottom line of the center. I don't know if my answer came Pam, across because I had a little.
No, it was good. It was good. I just want to. Pam, let me hold on a second. I'm gonna come in that second. So Pam, that's great information. Yeah, that's great information, Pam. You said IV bar. So let's sit down and say it. So we're talking about, because educate me, Pam. All right. Okay. As everybody knows, I'm the dumbest person on this podcast. So I need some education. Okay, when I roll up, are you saying to me that an IV bar, which I think is kind of a suburban mom, like wellness center type thing, that those are the people who say, hey, let's hop into chronically ill patients, serving them? Is that what we're talking about?
I'm seeing that in some cases. I'm one of those people, I think, and there's not a lot of us, that for certain indications don't have a problem with concept. I do believe that if you've got altitude sickness or you've got a real bad hangover, if you went to the ER, you'd be treated with hydration. I think there's a real place for that. And it would be a billable code in the real world, because I want to plump my cheekbones is not a billable code. And I'm not trying to diminish the business aspect of it, but there is a shortage on IV fluids. There's a nationwide problem getting products for people who are sick because of the diversion for non-medical use. But we are seeing now that the actual infusion world is merging. And I do think that they're going to, in some cases, get on the bandwagon and work towards treating patients that are medically ill. And it's going to be critical that we help them understand how you take care of these people is vastly different than someone that comes in that you could put this giant IV in with no problem because their veins are huge. I mean, quite basically, even placing an IV is a whole different prospect. Not to mention qualifying them medically and even getting the authorization. Breaking through the naivete has been eye-opening for a lot of my clients. And they appreciate it.
Yeah. That's,
While we're on the
Yeah.
topic of IV bars, I was traveling and the hotel didn't have a gym, so I went to a nearby gym. And this is not a nice gym. It was kind of a smelly old gym. And it had 2 infusion chairs sitting in the step room. And I
In a
assume this
smelly
is kind of an IV bar, right? You know, kind of get your fluid, get your amino acids. But Pam, from an operations perspective, I'm worried about consumers who have that low expectation of quality that any nurse can stick a needle in their arm and give them B12 or whatever it is. And do we do enough as an industry to educate about patient safety, about training, that this is really serious? Or does the IV bar kind of poison our industry?
Did you know that as long as the medical director is within their confines, a physician can supervise anyone to administer IVs? In many, many cases, it's not a nurse administering the fluids. It's not a nurse mixing and drying up. And
does that mean, does that mean the guy who helps me work on my glutes also can just give me an IV? Is that what we're saying here? Like Bob,
You
the
bet.
guy who's, he's going to.
So I have a question here then. So Pam, I mean, I remember when there was that big compounding pharmacy scandal up in the Northeast. Like, based off of what you just said, do you feel like there is an industry event similar to that could be on the horizon sooner than we believe?
so if you, and I'm not pick on
Due to
anybody
these
in
lack of
particular.
standards and everything?
Now, if you
Uh-huh.
go to and do a regular news search about deaths in IV clinics, in IV med spas, you'll find a couple landmark cases where unlicensed personnel treated people and there were deaths involved. And we don't know the particulars because litigation is pending. But when you use particular additives, if it's mixed incorrectly or if it isn't the proper concentration, you can stop someone's heart. And that's what happens in
Yeah.
a lot of cases when these occur. And I don't know about you, but when I go to a practitioner, I don't ask about their license. So if I'm not asking, is someone going to a med spa going to confirm that the person sticking them is a nurse or not? And do they know the difference?
Well, I'm from the South. Okay. So if you're from the South, we have a few sayings, and one of those is Lord forbid, right? Lord forbid, but those are the moment where we say, hey, we could end up in a Lord forbid moment, right? Like, God forbid somebody dies. That's what we say, right? But you think it's not a big deal to put an IV in, the pumping iron spot. And the reality is that a lot of people died going out west because of lack of regulation. That's what it was, right? And you just dig a hole, and you know what? People fell in those holes, right? And I'm not as big probably of a regulation person, politically as others, but OSHA is a pretty good thing, I think. I'm sure it's overreaches, but hey, if you're going to go up 1,000 feet, have a rail and maybe be connected to something in case you fall. That makes sense to me. But now I'm hearing this, like, this feels like the same type of thing, right? It feels like, hey, just go start mining. It'll be fine. And then you're like, yep, everybody died. Did we check on the dynamite? Like, no, not really. Bob was in charge of it. Does he know anything about dynamite? No, not really. Okay, no one's coming home. No one's coming home from this. So in that, I'm going to go to Brian on, the final here on this Uncharted. Just, regulatory challenges, need for compliance. And here's the issue. I often think that, I'm certainly not a person that says, if I'm from the government, I'm here to help. I'm like, no, I don't. No, I'm fine. I'm fine. I do not need help. I do not need help from the government. But I do think, the reality is compliance on some level of regular. I mean, are you worried about that from a payer standpoint? Are you worried about that from just in general what you're seeing out here, Brian?
Well, one thing on the, philosophically, I like the Wild West, right? And not big on regulation. I think it adds costs, burdens, stifles innovation. And there's definitely a move for accreditation among payers, right? My concern right now is most of the accreditations in an AIC setting, which is different than specialty pharmacy. They're really accrediting the pharmacy function infusion, which ignores I'm speaking somewhat out of ignorance, but I think there's a lot of ignoring of the nursing, the policies, the procedures. It's really, how's the drug handled? So I think we can do better, and the payer community can do better in terms of looking for standards that address quality outcomes, looking at the training of the staff. And again, I don't want to discredit, any physician, any MD or DO or nurse practitioner. This is in the scope of their license. And it's their license that's at risk, not a pharmacy. But I think that payers are kind of pushing for accreditation that doesn't fit. And that's where I think Pam kind of comes in with the strength of making sure that when you open a center, you're taking care of the totality of the patient, not just the handling of the drug, which is important, and not just the nurse or the medical director of policy. It's an entire 360 quality patient safety that I don't think the payers have their eyes on.
Yeah, and last thing on this, not only are we talking about patient, but also protect your own wallet, because if you don't do a good job at someone getting an Ocrevus, then guess what? There's $55,000 every 4 or 6 weeks gone. And so you're like, hey, that was $500,000 in revenue that's gone. Maybe you made $6,000 on it. You're saying, okay, well, that's $70,000 in profit gone. So like you have both sides, right? So let's start with humanity. Like let's when we're taking care of human beings, let's take care of the highest level, but at least fall back to your greed, right? Like don't lose the patient, right? So switching gears here and talking about, I think it would be fun to talk about either success stories or cautionary. Brian said something in our pre-episode that I loved, and he said, we have boom towns and ghost towns in the Wild West, right? And I just got back, Brian, from your beloved Arizona, where you're located, Mesa. I watched my beloved Chicago Cubs, who are having a terrible year, preseason there. But we got to take the whole fam, and we went through a old mining town that's now dead, and whatever, ghost town or whatever. So what are we hearing? I'm going to start with this. I get a call from someone who says, hey, we really want Prochant to do our reimbursement. Okay, fine. We're going to open it up. It's going to be AIC. It's going to be great. We're in the right spot. We're at great. And so they open. 8 weeks later, my reimbursement manager gets a phone call and says, do you know how to get referrals? What? Like, I'm sorry. You have 6 people that work. You don't have a referral plan? And they were like, well, we just thought like telling doctors we existed, they would send, what? No. So I'm a little worried about, like the guy showing up, like, do you know where I get a hammer to mine? And all the guys are just laughing like, this guy's not making it. This guy's dead by Thursday, right? He's dead. You have any water in your jug? No, I don't have any water. Okay. This guy's not coming back to camp, I mean, I'm curious, maybe we can go around, you guys take a little bit of time. You got any cautionary tales you're hearing out there, Brandon? I think you might have one.
Well, it's funny, John, that you just basically described the plot to Field of Dreams. Build it and they will come. That's not
you. Yeah, it's not. Yeah.
No, listen. I heard of something real recently, probably in the last 6 months or so, where we talked about private equity, we talked about all these guys, but I've seen where guys coming out of Facebook have started buying into these pharmacies and jumping therapy classes and all this kind of stuff, kind of a DME, TPN type pharmacy where they decided to open up a specialty pharmacy. And I mean, it took them all of 12 weeks to open and close because they didn't have a referral plan and they didn't have a payer strategy. They just thought, hey, we've got TPN contracts and all this kind of stuff. The rewards can be big, but obviously if the rewards are that big, the risks are very high, right? And I mean, my understanding is it almost bankrupted a very well established, very center of excellence in their therapeutic class. I mean, they were gone, almost as quickly as they arrived. So I definitely see some things like that.
Yeah, and that might be the worst case scenario, Brandon. Like, because there's
right.
I can't get a referral. Well, that's a problem. The worst case would be I can get a referral and don't have any contracts. Like, gosh, now I'm going to spend all my money and not get paid back. It's one thing to not make any money. It's another thing to lose millions, right? And so, Pam, anything in your side that you've been traveling the country, meeting with folks, any cautionary tales out there? Any ghost towns? You're like, I walked through a ghost town the other day. It was terrible.
Recently, I had a client, the hot topic is oncology because of the biologics. Cytotoxic, but not NIOSH. They're not a hazardous substance. So, everybody could do it, right? And I had a client that built a big clean room, hired a medical director, hired the nurses, didn't get a contract. Never occurred to them. They were an established pharmacy and did not have a contracts person on staff. All this expense languishing and never had provision for the drug. And the other thing was they decided they weren't going to do hazardous drugs. Well, $1 million into a clean room, what was the point? So I don't know who advised them going in, and all I can think of is no one did. Did they not ask the questions? I think sometimes if we know a little bit and we're really good at what the assumption can be made that everything works this way. And you can't do that with infusion. It is truly the Wild West. And if you don't ask a lot of questions and realize that you have no idea of the vast amount of information that you don't have, me with 40 years experience, there's a lot I don't know. To be foolish enough to trip into that hole.
Yeah, I think that there's an old saying, no one's neutral on a moving train, and we're all standing on top of a train and we're like, oh, I'm neutral. You're not neutral. You're being pulled along, right? You're being pulled along. I think all of us are. So if you say, well, I've got 25 years experience, so I know what's coming next. I'm like, I'm not so certain you do. And there are booms, right? I know a Mid-South provider that was white space 6 years ago, 100 million today. They're 100 million in 6 years. If you went out to any, north, east, or, Palo Alto, any of those areas and say, hey, VC, I've got, PE money. I've got a healthcare company that's going to go from 0 to 100 million in 5 years. They're going to say, take all my money right now. Take all of my money right now. So we do have those boom towns, right? We do, but they're really well organized. Where they put AICs is really critical to them. I mean, this group, and we're not in we're not here at Beyond the Drip. We're not gonna talk about the bad that we see, and we're not gonna talk about the good as far as name value. We're not gonna name anybody, but they're this good one. They're very successful. They think, Brian, they think about their payer strategy before they go. They think about the competitive market. They go and do an analysis. How hard will it be for us? They go and actually talk to payers and say, if we came in, what then? And I just think that, so many people, Brian, are going into this without considering, Pam just talked about referrals, but not considering payers. What would you challenge them with, what should they be thinking about?
You said we're not going to name names, but I'm going to name a couple of companies outside of the specific space. We talked about, capital's not a concern, right? Wasn't a concern. Walmart, with their entry into health and pulling back, CVS with the number of locations of having a war chest is great. You make a heck of a lot of mistakes. But if your premise is fundamentally wrong, no amount of capital is going to fix that. And so I think that's a little bit of a concern is just the bravado of no money. And my concern, again, we're not when a payer looks to acquire, which we see now. I see it from the payer perspective of to successfully build an AIC, they'd be contracted with everybody because your referral providers are contracted with everybody and they don't want to pick and choose patients. If you're a provider-driven strategy, I don't see that much control as much as payers like to think that they're driving referrals and controlling side of service. That's marketing. That's boots on the ground, retail, going office to office and asking for referrals. So when the payers can't do that, I think, I'm not Charles Barkley where I'm saying I guarantee it, but I have my concerns about a cautionary tale of payers jumping in and acquiring. I don't see them well positioned to capitalize on this business. I think a lot of others can, but I just don't. I'm scratching my head about that acquisition, from 60 or 90 days ago.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm going to go to Brandon. All right, as we kind of round the corner here, guys, on Beyond the Drip, the future of the frontier. All right, the future of the frontier. Brandon, what's your gut tell you on how consolidation, markets? I mean, we saw this in Home Infusion. So we saw this in Home Infusion, right? Home Infusion birthed in, depending on who you talk to, late 80s, early 90s, right? And then it starts to go big, and then it goes really HME, right? Small mom and pops. And then all of a sudden you had 3, 4, 5 entities come in. BioScript came in and bought everybody, and then Option Care came in and bought everybody. Then Option Care and BioScript merged, and now you have those same things, right? We know those big, moving, awesome, well-run companies, that we have with, the Cabas and, in the Home Infusion. Are we going to see that? You think we're going to see that, Brandon? Are we going to have this full 4 or 5 come in and take 60% of the market like we did in Home Infusion?
It's hard to say, right? I mean, we are starting to see some bigger groups get some scale, but it also seems to be to a point. Nobody seems to really be opening that. What I see maybe where that's happening is more of the infusion pharmacies, like the BioScripts and Option Cares that have 85, 100 and something sites that just, kind of downstream, just let's plop a chair or two in. But these standalones I see seem to be having maybe some scalability from a more than just a regional perspective. Yep. And so the other part to that is a pharmacy, when you look at, how much they can actually operate and everything from that perspective, can be way more significant than, AIC or AIS can. And so their footprint with brick and mortar has to be a lot more concentrated in those larger areas. So it's really kind of interesting to see whether or not those things can happen. I think the way that they will happen is obviously through technology and, oversight from that perspective. But from that, it's yet to be seen. But I think they can get there. It's just somebody's going to come through and break through that type of thing. But the other part to that is, the intentionality, because not all markets are AIC, pro AIC, basically, from a payer perspective and things like that, where they might actually be from a pharmacy perspective. Right. Just because you do have a pharmacy there doesn't mean you should have an AIC there.
And Pam, last question for you here. Let's think about what Brandon just brought up. Like all of these folks who are trying to play in all 3 areas. How do you see this folding in with, let's say, a healthcare organization A has home infusion, specialty infusion, AIC, and AIS, and they're thinking about doing, some drugs. I need to do the first one on site. I'm a little neophyte toward why that is. And, do you see these groups trying to just say, no, we want it all. We want to capture it all. If we can do it if we have to do that drug at home, we want to do it there. If we bring them in. You see those big groups. Is that what they want to do?
Yeah. Because you have to consider those special populations, for instance, your transplant patients. Big fish. Most of them are Medicare. Your antivirals covered at
Yeah.
home. But if they need cytogam, the IG for cytomegalovirus, it's not covered at home as a Part D drug with a giant copay. If they can send them to an AIC, which they own, they capture all that revenue. There are those patients that don't want someone in their home. If a pharmacy has a suite, which is fairly easy to do, they can capture that. If they have a handful of AICs around the region, patient happens to live in Lubbock and you've got an AIC in the area, it's a whole lot easier for them than having to go to Amarillo or having to be, heaven forbid, to Abilene or wherever it is they have their centers. So a few chairs in areas that is locally controlled, I think, is really, really helpful. Scaling that is another story. Between the staffing and getting a medical director that's comfortable with the concept and maintaining a referral basis so you can afford to staff it the way you should is another story. And I do think being able to cross-cover nurses between entities is really a helpful thing in a case like that. Because face it, nurses are prime right now, and they can pretty much write their own ticket. So we do need to keep them engaged to retain them.
Yeah, I agree. I agree 100%. All right. Ending on our last thing, buying or selling. All right, that's it. All right. So just like a stock, you're either buying it or you're selling it. I want the answer.
Yeah.
Okay. In 2026, you would spend, you run into a good amount of money and you want to open a independent AIC. It's 2026 now, mid 2026. Are you buying or are you selling that? All right. And so, Brian, you buying or you selling that idea?
I'm buying for a while. I think there's still a lot of expansion. I think the big players are coming in. But, thankfully, as America, and when we spoke with Reese, he talked about his success being really built on service. And I think that's still where the success is high service, high touch, patient-centered convenience. I think all day there's still room for new entrants that are service-focused.
Okay. Pam, buying or selling? June 2026. Are you opening an AIC with your own money?
I'm all in. And you know why? My dream would be to have a multi-specialty line infusion center with a specialty physician at the helm as a medical director, able to place lines as outpatients, able to service any specialty patient, and that includes oncology, and service sensitive populations excellently. And I do think there's room for that. There will always be room for that. And the missing link I'm finding is leadership that has the know-how at the outset. And those people are hard to identify. I think the key is identifying those people and getting them on board early on. I'm buying.
Okay. She's buying. Brandon Carpenter, it's June 2026. You are a rich man. Are you buying or selling? Opening up your own AIC?
Love it or list it.
Listen, I've already started the business plan based off of what Pam. Yeah. Based off what Pam just said, I've already taken notes, and I'm starting June 2025 to get a year head start.
June 2026.
I'm buying. I'm with Brian. I think a lot of people get distracted by the big guys saying, "Oh, they're already there." But I've seen a lot of infusion pharmacies start from the concept of the big guy is here or was here. They didn't do the patient satisfaction or the patient clientele well, and so the market is ripe. So I think there's going to be some guys that have some big footprints, but have a lot of space to fill in and make your mark.
I am selling. Now, my answer would be different if it were today, but June 2026, I am selling, and here's why I'm selling. I certainly think that all of you had great answers, and I think you're all right, except for the buying part. You will be able to do this, but I think 2024 will continue to be expansion. I think 2025 is going to be private equity is going to start scooping and scooping and scooping. The amount of money that I have to put in with the risk, I think there's another boom out there. I think there's another boom coming that I would probably do. So I'm probably selling and saying that I probably would not just do that. So hopefully I'm wrong since I'm in this industry. That'd be great. So it can keep expanding. So, hey, I want to thank everybody for joining us on Beyond the Drip, our monthly podcast about all things infusion. And so I want to thank Pam, Brian, and Brandon for joining us in our roundtable. This has been the Wild West of healthcare, infusion therapy. Whether it's a boom town or a ghost town, we will be here to talk through it every single month. Thank you all and have a wonderful day.